Their mercy was a privilege, not a right. Admiral Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the fleet carrier Resolve, the starlight of Kepler 186F, glinting off the polished floor. Before her, the main holographic display showed the system in stark tactical relief, the emerald sphere of the colony world, the fragile thread of the civilian convoy attempting to flee, and the jagged crimson icons of the Kiran Imperium fleet, a wolf pack at the throat of their last hope. A countdown timer superimposed in burning gold ticked down with unnerving serenity. 000. 6 hours until the Kiran ultimatum expired, and with it the lives of 2 million souls. Her second-in-command, Commander Valerius, kept his gaze fixed on the display, his jaw tight. "Their demand is unchanged, Admiral. Unconditional surrender of the colony, forfeiture of all fleet assets, and submission to the Imperium's benevolence doctrine. It's a caller, plain and simple." "It always is," Rostova murmured, her voice a low counterpoint to the hum of the ship's life support. She felt the subtle vibration through the soles of her boots, a constant reminder of the fusion heart beating deep within the Resolve. The air carried the faint, clean scent of ionized ozone from the recycling scrubbers. The fleet-mind Solon manifested as a calm blue light, pulsing from the holotable's core. "Their doctrine is strategically inflexible, Admiral. An ultimatum once issued cannot be rescinded without a catastrophic loss of honor. They believe this makes them strong. It makes them predictable." Rostova corrected, her eyes narrowing. "And we are here to teach them the cost of that predictability. They would learn the true meaning of a reckoning." In the convoy huddled in the cramped galley of the freighter Stargazer, a young girl named Alara pressed her face against the cold viewport. She watched the distant, beautiful ships of the Terran Third Fleet, silver needles against the black velvet of space. Her father, a hydroponics engineer, placed a hand on her shoulder, the fabric of his jumpsuit worn thin. He didn't speak, but his presence was a shield against the fear that hung in the recycled air like a shroud. Ilara knew the stories of the Kirans of worlds that bent the knee and found only servitude. She also knew the stories of Admiral Rostova. Rostova tapped a control on her console, bringing up the fleet's heat and energy budgets. They were outgunned 3-1. A direct confrontation would be a massacre, a glorious but pointless last stand. The Kirans knew it, hence their arrogance, their absolute refusal to negotiate. They had presented their terms, and now simply waited for the clock to run out, their gun ports glowing with latent power. "Valerius, confirm the decoy drones are primed." Rostova ordered, her tone crisp and devoid of doubt. "Full-spectrum emission profiles. I want them to look, sound, and smell like our entire heavy cruiser squadron. Drones are green." Admiral Valerius confirmed, his fingers flying across his own console. The reflected light cast sharp shadows across his face. Energy signatures matched to the Valiant and her sisters. They won't know the difference until the first shot misses. Their certainty was a weapon we would turn against them. Solon's light pulsed gently. The probability of the Kiran fleet commander Overlord Vex committing his primary asset sets to the decoy vector is 94.7%. His doctrine demands an overwhelming response to any perceived challenge. He will see it as an act of defiance to be crushed. "An act of defiance," Rostova mused, a faint smile touching her lips. "He's not wrong." She watched the crimson icons of the Chiron battleships, a tight, brutal fist around the convoy's escape route. They had formed a classic blockade, a wall of steel and plasma. A wall they believed to be impassable. But every wall has a gate. They built a cage, we forged a key. The convoy's route is plotted through the Serpent's Pass, the asteroid field on the system's ecliptic. Rostova continued, tracing a glowing green line through a dense cluster of rock and ice. "The Kirans have it blanketed with sensor pods and picket ships. They expect us to try and punch through." "A fool's errand," Valerius grunted. "We'd be torn apart before we even reached the halfway point." Which is why we won't, Rostova stated. She zoomed the display in, not on the asteroid field, but on a seemingly empty patch of space several thousand kilometers to its galactic north. Solon began deploying the mirror lattice. Phase 1. A cascade of tiny silver icons detached from the hulls of her cruisers, fanning out in a precise geometric pattern. They were the fleet's secret weapon, millions of gossamer-thin microsails, each capable of reflecting sensor signals, light, and even low-grade plasma. Individually, they were insignificant. Together, they could reshape the very fabric of a battlefield. They would stare into a void of their own making. The lattice will deploy in a cascading array, Solon explained, its voice calm and informational. Once activated, it will create a perfect sensor ghost, an echo of the Serpent's Pass. The Kirans will see 2 asteroid fields, one real, one a reflection. The console glare intensified as the first mirrors locked into position, their status flipping from amber to green. Rostova's plan was simple in its audacity. While the Kirans were distracted by the cruiser decoys streaking towards their main line, the real convoy under heavy electronic warfare cover would slip into the real asteroid field. At the same time, the mirror lattice would activate, creating a flawless duplicate of that field nearby. The Kiran pickets, their sensors overwhelmed by ghost signals and conflicting data from 2 identical fields, would be caught between reality and reflection. A hesitation was all the advantage we needed. Their doctrine demands certainty, Rostova said, watching the timer dip below 5 hours. When their sensors show 2 identical escape routes, both filled with the convoy's ghost signatures, they will be forced to split their picket forces. That momentary division is our window. The deck plates beneath her feet hummed with rising power as the ship prepared for the maneuver. It's a thin window, Admiral Valerius warned, though his eyes shone with grim appreciation for the strategy. Thin is enough! Rostova's gaze was fixed on the tactical display, but her mind was on the people in those fragile convoy ships. She was not just fighting for a colony. She was fighting for the principle that a threat could not be the basis of a conversation. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by callers. Their arrogance wrote checks their fleet couldn't cash. The countdown hit 0430. Execute, Rostova commanded. The decoy drones flared to life, their engines screaming into the void, with the raw, furious energy signature of a full battle group on an attack run. They blazed a trail directly toward the heart of the Kiran blockade. As predicted, the crimson icons stirred. Overlord Vex, refusing to believe his ultimatum could be challenged, saw only a suicidal charge. His primary battleships turned to meet it, their massive weapon ports sliding open. They took the bait. Simultaneously, the convoy, cloaked in a shroud of electronic silence, began its slow, nerve-wracking drift into the Serpent's Pass. On the Resolve's bridge, the only sound was the quiet hiss of the ventilation and the soft chime of consoles processing data. The tension was a physical presence, a weight on every shoulder. Rostova felt her own heartbeat, a steady, measured drum against her ribs. Then Solon spoke. Mirror lattice active. We are now projecting a ghost field. Kiran picket ships are registering conflicting telemetry. The main display flickered, showing the Kiran commander's view 2 identical swirling asteroid fields, both teeming with the faint signatures of the fleeing convoy. We had given them a choice they could not comprehend. A junior sensor technician, her voice barely a whisper, reported, Ma'am, Kiran picket wings are splitting formation. They're attempting to cover both fields. Just as we planned, Valerius breathed a bead of sweat, tracing a path down his temple. They're stretched thin, Rostova observed. Now we carve out the path. She turned to her tactical officer. Lieutenant, signal the breacher corvettes. Thread the needle. Minimal energy expenditure. I want them to be ghosts until the moment they strike. 3 small, swift ships detached from the main fleet, their engines running cold. They were scalpels designed not for brawling, but for precise, disabling strikes. Their targets were the sensor pods the Kirans had seeded at the entrance to the real asteroid field. They would physically sever the enemy's eyes. Their wall would become a door. The tension on the bridge stretched to a breaking point. Every crew member watched the tactical display where the breacher corvettes moved like silent sharks through the dark. A flicker of red light near the asteroid field entrance marked the first successful strike. Then another, and another. The Kiran sensor grid, already confused by the mirror lattice, was now going blind. "Convoy is entering the cleared corridor," Valerius announced, his voice tight with relief. "Pickets are still divided. They don't know which field is real." But the Kirans were not fools. The decoy drones now approaching the main Kiran line were beginning to show their flaws. Their heat signatures weren't perfect. Their mass profile was too light. Overlord Vex would realize his error within minutes. The deception had a shelf life. "Solon, what's Vex's status?" Rostova demanded, her knuckles white where she gripped the console's edge. "Overlord Vex is revectoring his primary fleet," the AI responded, its tone unchanging. "He has recognized the decoy. His estimated time to engagement with the convoy's true position is 12 minutes. A new, more urgent clock appeared on the screen. "That's not enough time for them to clear the field," Valerius said, his earlier relief evaporating. "It doesn't have to be," Rostova countered. "It only has to be enough time for the next phase." She turned away from the main display, her gaze sweeping over her crew. "All ships brace for fleet-wide micro-jump. Target the far side of the Serpent's Pass. We are not just escorting the convoy. We are becoming the new wall." This was the pivot. The Resolve shuddered as its short-range jump drive began to charge the sound, a low, resonant groan that vibrated through the deck. The civilian crew on the Stargazer felt it too, a deep thrum that promised either salvation or doom. Ilara's father pulled her close, shielding her eyes from the viewport, as the stars outside began to warp and distort. He whispered stories of Earth of green fields and blue oceans, a desperate prayer in the face of annihilation. Rostova watched the energy levels spike. A micro-jump for a single ship was risky. A coordinated jump for an entire fleet into the heart of a dense asteroid field was bordering on insane. But it was the only move left. They had to get ahead of the convoy and intercept Vex's converging fleet. They expected a flight. They would find a fight. "Jump sequence initiated," Solon announced, synchronizing fleet clocks. 5-4. The lights on the bridge dimmed as power was shunted to the drive core. The view on the main screen dissolved into a vortex of stretched starlight. 3-2. Rostova took a steadying breath, the recycled air suddenly feeling thin. 1. Execute. The universe outside twisted. A bone-jarring lurch, a moment of crushing pressure, and then silence. The Resolve and the entire Third Fleet emerged from the jump in a perfectly spaced formation at the exit of the Serpent's Pass. They were battered, their systems screaming from the strain. Heat sinks glowed cherry red along the hulls of several destroyers, a visible cost for their speed. But they were there. Between the escaping convoy and the wrath of the Kiran Imperium, the line was drawn. Before them, the Kiran fleet, led by Vex's monstrous flagship, was bearing down at full burn. They were a wave of pure, destructive power. But now they were no longer facing the tail of a fleeing escort. They were facing the teeth of a prepared battle line. Rostova's fleet was positioned perfectly. Their main guns charged their shields at maximum. Valerius let out a shaky breath. "Admiral, we made it. The convoy is clearing the field behind us." "The first part is done," Rostova said, her eyes locked on the approaching enemy. She could see the fury in their formation, the way they moved without caution, driven by the rage of a spurned ego. They still believed their numbers gave them the ultimate advantage. They had yet to understand the trap. This was not a battlefield. It was a classroom. Solon began Phase 2 of the lattice deployment. Rostova ordered, her voice ringing with cold authority. I want a full system-scale reflection. Let's show Overlord Vex what it feels like to face himself. The micro-sails of the mirror lattice, which had created a ghost asteroid field, now began a new, far more complex maneuver. They reoriented themselves, spreading out across millions of kilometers of space. They were no longer meant to deceive sensors with static images. They were about to turn the very energy of the Chiron fleet into a weapon against them. Their anger would be their undoing. Overlord Vex is hailing us, the comms officer reported, her voice strained. On screen, Rostova commanded. The face of the Chiron overlord appeared on the display. He was a creature of harsh angles and burning pride, his features contorted in a mask of fury. Admiral Rostova, you have chosen poorly. Your pathetic tricks have bought you nothing but a swifter death. My ultimatum stands. Surrender now or be erased. Rostova met his gaze without flinching. Overlord, your ultimatum was rejected the moment you issued it. You operate under the assumption that you hold all the cards, that your power gives you the right to dictate terms to free people. She paused, letting the silence hang in the space between their ships. The hum of the Resolve's weapon capacitors was a low, hungry growl. We are not here to negotiate our surrender, she continued, her voice level and clear. We are here to present you with a new ledger. An accounting of your actions. You see, your doctrine has a flaw. It presumes your target will always be on the defensive. Their doctrine was a hammer, and they saw only nails. What is the meaning of this foolish prattle? Vex snarled. Rostova allowed herself another small smile. It means you have flown exactly where we wanted you. Solon opened the corridor. On the tactical map, the Terran fleet, which had formed a solid defensive line, suddenly shifted. A gap appeared in the center of their formation, a clear, unobstructed path leading directly to the now distant convoy. It was a tantalizingly open invitation, an apparent strategic blunder. Vex's eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed in suspicion. A trick. No trick, Rostova said calmly. It's a choice. The path to your prize is open. All you have to do is take it. We gave them the gun and dared them to shoot. The Chiron overlord hesitated for only a moment. His pride, his doctrine, the sheer momentum of his attack, it all pushed him forward. He saw a cowardly fleet breaking formation, offering a clear shot at the helpless civilians. To refuse would be to show weakness. All ships full thrust, Vex roared to his own fleet. Destroy the convoy. Leave nothing of this insolent fleet but dust. The crimson icons surged forward, pouring through the gap Rostova had created. They accelerated into the empty space, their engines flaring white-hot as they raced to deliver the final blow. They were a spear aimed at the heart of the colony's future. But the space they were entering was not empty. It was filled with the reconfigured mirror lattice. Their kill box was about to be turned inside out. On the bridge of a Chiron cruiser, a sensor officer watched his screen in confusion. Sir, I'm detecting reflections, multiple energy sources. They seem to be mirroring our own fleet. His captain brushed him off, his eyes fixed on the fleeing convoy. The prize was just ahead. Rostova stood as still as a statue on her command deck. Valerius, are the convoy's emergency burns plotted? Yes, Admiral. The moment we spring the trap, they will scatter. The Chirons won't have a clean shot. Good. Rostova watched the Chiron fleet plunge deeper into the corridor. Solon, how long until they reach the optimal focal point? 17 seconds, the AI replied. The seconds crawled by, each one a lifetime. The Chiron ships, confident in their imminent victory, began to open fire, unleashing lances of brilliant plasma and streaks of kinetic munitions toward the distant convoy. They were firing at extreme range, their accuracy degraded by distance, but the sheer volume of their fire was terrifying. They were signing their own death warrant. Focal point reached, Solon stated. Rostova's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Activate the lattice. Full reflection protocol. Settle the account. The command went out. Across millions of kilometers, the invisible microsails snapped to a new alignment. They were no longer passive reflectors. They were now a perfectly calibrated weapon, a set of immense phased mirrors designed to capture and redirect energy. The first plasma bolts from the Kairan fleet hit the mirror field, and instead of passing through or dissipating, they were caught, bent, refocused, and sent straight back to their point of origin. Their own power became our sword. On the Kairan flagship, Overlord Vex watched in horror as his own brilliant energy beams, the symbols of his power, performed an impossible U-turn in the void. They returned not as stray shots, but as a concentrated, vengeful storm. The focused energy of his entire fleet, amplified by the lattice's geometry, was now aimed directly back at his own ships. The lead Kairan destroyers vanished in silent, blinding flashes of light, consumed by their own fire. Cruisers had their shields stripped away in an instant, their hulls buckling and melting under the returned onslaught. Panic erupted across the Kairan comms channels, a symphony of disbelief and terror. "What is this witchcraft?" Vex bellowed, his composure shattering. "Report!" His tactical officer stared at the display, his face pale. "Sir, their fleet didn't break. It's a shell game. The ship's on the flanks. They're projecting a false formation. The real fleet is holding position, boxing us in. The corridor, it was never a corridor. It was a lens." Their path to victory was a funnel to defeat. Rostova watched the chaos unfold with a heavy heart. She had given them an off-ramp. Vex could have paused, questioned the opening. His doctrine had blinded him. Solon broadcast on all channels, Kairan frequency, unencrypted. "Broadcasting Admiral." Rostova stepped forward, her voice resonating across the bridge and into the ears of every Kairan captain, now trapped in a vortex of their own making. "Overlord Vex, this is what it costs to issue an ultimatum to a people who will not kneel. Every shot you fire is a shot against yourself. Every life you take is tallied on a ledger you will be forced to balance." She pointed to the tactical display, where the mirror lattice was now actively tracking the Kairan ships, ensuring every volley was returned to sender. The reflections weren't perfect. Some energy was lost, but it was more than enough. The lattice was a matador's cape, using the enemy's own momentum to guide them to their doom. The mirror showed them their true face. "This ends now," Rostova declared. "Power down your weapons, shut down your drives, or be consumed by the fire you so eagerly unleashed. You have 60 seconds to comply." This is not a negotiation. It is a lesson. A new countdown appeared on the Kairan flagship's main screen. It was not a grand, imperious ultimatum. It was a simple, stark choice delivered by the quiet hum of an enemy's undeniable tactical superiority. Vex stared at the screen, his fleet tearing itself apart, trapped between the immovable Terran line and the vengeful ghost in the machine. The student was now the teacher. His pride warred with the undeniable reality of his situation. His ships were burning. His crews were dying. His doctrine, the bedrock of his culture's military, might have been exposed as a hollow shell, a brittle piece of dogma that shattered against an opponent who refused to play by its rules. The air on his bridge was thick with the smell of scorched circuitry and fear. Valerius watched the Kairan fleet's energy signatures. "Some of them are powering down weapons, Admiral. The smaller ships first. They're breaking formation." Vex won't, Rostova predicted. Not yet. His pride is too great. She was right. The Kairan flagship, the Imperious Will, surged forward, its main cannon glowing with terrifying energy. It was preparing to fire a ship-killing spinal lance, a weapon so powerful it could potentially overload the mirror lattice in a single focused blast. It was a desperate final gamble, a gamble we were prepared for. "He's targeting the Resolve," Valerius warned, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm. "He thinks this is a duel between commanders," Rostova said, her voice calm. "He still doesn't understand." She looked to her AI. Solon, he's all yours. The blue light of the fleet mind pulsed brightly. Acknowledged, Admiral. Realigning primary lattice nodes 4 through 7. I have been monitoring a structural harmonic in his main cannon's charging sequence. It creates a subtle energy bleed-off. Solon had seeded this mystery hours ago, an anomaly in the Chiron energy signatures it had been patiently analyzing. This was the reveal. The harmonic was a flaw, a tiny imperfection in their design. An imperfection Solon was about to exploit. The bleed-off is insignificant in most circumstances, the AI continued. But when reflected back upon itself at precisely the right frequency, it should initiate a catastrophic feedback loop within his own weapon system. Their greatest strength was their greatest weakness. The imperious will fired. A spear of incandescent fury wide as a cruiser shot across the void. It was a testament to Chiron engineering a pure expression of their philosophy of overwhelming force. But before it could reach the Terran line, it struck the reconfigured section of the mirror lattice. The tiny, almost undetectable energy bleed from the cannon's firing sequence was captured, isolated, and amplified 1,000,000 times over. The lattice did not return the main blast. It returned only the flaw. A whisper of energy, perfectly tuned, shot back down the path of the main beam. It was invisible, a ghost signal riding in the wake of the storm. It struck the Chiron flagship's spinal cannon just as its firing cycle was completing. On the bridge of the imperious will, every alarm shrieked at once. The main cannon, instead of powering down, began to glow an angry, unstable red. Energy surged backward through the ship's power conduits. Overlord Vex could only watch as his own weapon devoured his ship from the inside out. The imperious will did not explode. It imploded, crushed in upon itself in a silent final convulsion of light and energy. A reckoning delivered, with the destruction of their flagship and the death of their overlord. The remaining Chiron fleet's will to fight evaporated. One by one, their weapons powered down. Their engines went cold. In the space of 5 minutes, the most feared battle fleet in the sector had been rendered utterly impotent, defeated not by superior firepower, but by superior intellect. They had been forced to look in a mirror and had been shattered by their own reflection. Rostova surveyed the scene. The civilian convoy was safe, already beginning to scatter to designated safe zones. The Chiron fleet floated crippled and leaderless. The cost to her own fleet was minimal, the heat damage from the jump a few drained capacitors. The breacher corvettes were reporting minor micrometeoroid impacts easily repaired. A wave of profound relief washed over the bridge of the Resolve, so powerful it was almost a physical force. Valerius Rostova said, her voice soft but firm. Send a message to the remaining Chiron captains. Tell them to stand by for instruction. We will be boarding their ships to accept their surrender and to render aid, mercy with teeth. It was the core of her ethos, the guiding principle of the Third Fleet. They had taught the lesson. Now it was time to show them what true strength looked like. They came with chains, but we offered a hand. The cleanup took days. The Chiron ships were disarmed, their crews taken into humane custody. Rostova herself led the boarding party to the Chiron second-in-command's vessel. She found a defeated officer, shell-shocked and disbelieving. She did not lecture him. She simply handed him a data slate. This is a full tactical record of the engagement, she said. Study it. Understand why you lost. Your doctrine of ultimatums is a poison. It breeds arrogance and stifles creativity. It is a strategic dead end. The Chiron officer looked at her, his alien features a mixture of confusion and dawning respect. You could have destroyed us all, and taught you nothing, Rostova replied. We don't seek subjects. We seek equals. Go home. Tell your Imperium what you learned here. Tell them the age of the ultimatum is over. This was how you changed the galaxy. A week later, the public ledger of the Galactic Concordiate was updated. By formal petition from the unified worlds of the Terran Federation, backed by irrefutable tactical data from the Kepler 186F engagement, the ultimatum doctrine was officially censured and declared an act of illegal aggression. Any empire employing it would face immediate and binding economic and military sanctions. The precedent was locked. Aboard the Resolve, Rostova stood with Solon in the quiet of the observation deck, watching the last of the civilian convoy make planetfall. The emerald world below seemed to shine a little brighter. Your strategy was successful. Admiral Solon noted its light a soft blue glow. The models predict a 78% probability that the Chiron Imperium will undergo a significant doctrinal reformation within the next 5 standard years. Only 78% Rostova asked a hint of weariness in her voice. The emotional cost of the battle was only now setting in. She felt the weight of the lives she had held in her hands. The variable is pride, Admiral. It is a difficult element to quantify. Isn't it just, she murmured. She thought of Vex, of his blind fury. She had not wanted his death, but he had left her no choice. The trap had to be perfect, the lesson absolute. Any hesitation, any crack in their resolve, and the Kirans would have pounced. She had to be as unbending as they were, but in the service of mercy, not tyranny. It was a fine line to walk. Her character had been tested. The temptation to simply annihilate the Kiran fleet to answer their brutality with overwhelming force had been there. It would have been easier, cleaner. But it would have been a betrayal of everything she stood for. She had held the line not just for her fleet, but for her own soul. They sought to make us monsters and found only a mirror. The ship around her was quiet, the low hum of its systems a comforting presence. The scent of ozone was gone, replaced by the faint, earthy smell of real coffee from the small replicator in the corner. The victory felt incomplete. The Kiran fleet was defeated, the doctrine censured, but the ideas behind it still existed. The galaxy was a large place. There would be other fights, other ultimatums. Solon, she said quietly. Run a deep scan on the data we recovered from the Imperious Will's wreckage. Cross-reference it with the comms patterns you flagged before the battle. Vex's desperation felt disproportionate. He wasn't just fighting for a colony. He was fighting like he was running from something. The AI's light pulsed. An interesting hypothesis, Admiral. I had noted a series of encrypted burst transmissions from his flagship directed outside our system on a non-standard hyper-relay band. Their destination was masked. This was the second mystery, the one that had been seeded in the heat of the pre-battle tension. He wasn't just reporting, and Rostova mused, turning the idea over in her mind. He was sending warnings, or calling for help. My analysis was incomplete at the time, Solon admitted. But with the Rex data logs, I may be able to triangulate the signal's vector and decrypt its contents. It will take time. Take all the time you need, Rostova said, her gaze drifting back to the stars. The victory at Kepler 186F felt less like an ending and more like an opening move in a much larger game. They had faced a wolf, but what if that wolf had been fleeing a lion? The thought sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the station's temperature. Their war was over, but a larger one may have just begun. The next few weeks were spent assisting the colony, repairing the fleet, and debriefing the rescued civilians. Life settled into a routine, the sharp edges of the battle softening with time. Valerius oversaw the refitting of the ships, his command style a perfect blend of efficiency and compassion for the weary crews. The civilian vignettes that had played out in Rostova's mind, the girl at the window, the engineer preparing the mirrors, were now real people she met in the colony's welcome center, their faces filled with gratitude. It grounded her, reminded her of the true stakes. One evening, as she was reviewing supply manifests, the light in her ready room pulsed blue. Admiral Solon's voice came devoid of its usual calm. There was an urgency to it, a tightly controlled alarm. I have decrypted the transmissions from Overlord Vex's flagship. Rostova put down her data slate. What did you find? They were not distress calls, Admiral, nor were they status reports to the Kiran Imperium. The AI paused a rare moment of hesitation. They were offerings, tributes. Tributes to whom? The destination of the signals was a dead zone in the Perseus Arm, a region known only as the Silence. But the recipient is named in the logs, a designation I have cross-referenced with obscure historical databases. It is a name that has not been spoken in galactic records for over 1,000 years. The air grew heavy. Rostova leaned forward, her heart beginning to pound, a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. He was sending tribute. Solon continued to empower the Chirans believed to be mythical, a legend used to frighten their young. He was paying them in resources in captured populations to leave Kieran territory untouched. The ultimatum he gave us was not for his glory. It was to fill a quota. Give me the name, Solon. Rostova commanded, her voice a low whisper. The blue light pulsed once bright and sharp. He called them the architects of the ledger. The old gods were waking up. The silence on the observation deck was a heavy, suffocating thing. The name hung in the air between Admiral and AI, an ancient weight pressing down on the modern, sterile environment of the starship. The architects of the ledger. It sounded less like a name and more like a final judgment. Rostova felt a coldness creep into her bones that had nothing to do with the ship's life support. Her victory, so clean and decisive, now felt like a child scattering a bully's toys, oblivious to the fact that the bully's terrifying parent was on their way. Elaborate, Solon, she said, her voice a low command that brooked no argument. The data is fragmented, Admiral. Vex's logs refer to them as a transactional species. They do not conquer, they audit. They arrive in a system, perform a complete analysis of its total energy resources and biological potential, and present the dominant species with a ledger. The balance is the tribute they demand. And if you can't pay, Rostova asked, though she already knew the answer. They did not negotiate debts, they collected them. The term Vex used was liquidation, Solon replied. The system's assets are harvested, efficiently, completely. The AI's blue light flickered, a subtle sign of the immense processing power it was dedicating to this new, horrifying context. Vex's ultimatum to the Kepler colony was not an act of Chiron expansion. It was an attempt to gather the assets needed to pay the architects and keep them away from the Imperium's core worlds. Valerius entered the observation deck, a data slate in his hand and a weary but satisfied expression on his face. Admiral, the last of the Kiran prisoners have been transferred to the holding facility. Their second-in-command, Kalen, is asking to speak with you. He stopped, sensing the glacial atmosphere in the room. Ma'am, is everything all right? Rostova turned from the star-dusted view. Our victory just became a liability, Commander. We didn't just defeat a Kiran fleet. It seems we've defaulted on a loan to a predator that has been haunting this galaxy since before our species learned to make fire. The universe was bigger and older than they knew. She explained what Solon had found. The color drained from Valerius's face. He sank into an observation chair, the data slate slipping from his grasp and clattering onto the deck. The sound was unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. He looked from Rostova to the silent stars, the implications crashing down on him. So Vex. He was desperate, Valerius breathed. He wasn't just a tyrant. He was a terrified man trying to pay a monster to stay in its cage. It would seem so, Rostova affirmed. And we just broke the cage. She straightened her uniform tunic, a reflexive gesture of imposing order on a situation rapidly spiraling into chaos. I'll speak with Kalen. I want to hear it from him. I want to look in his eyes and understand the enemy we've truly made. The truth was a weapon, and they were standing at the wrong end of it. The detention cell was sparse but humane. Kalen, the Chiron commander, sat on a simple bench, his posture defeated but not broken. When Rostova entered, he stood a flicker of his old authority returning. He was the one who had requested this meeting, yet he seemed uncertain how to begin. "You gave me this," Kalen said, holding up the data slate with the battle logs. "You said to study it, to understand." "I do." "Your strategy was flawless. You used our own doctrine against us like a mirror." He paused, his gaze intense. "But you do not understand well fire tooth you have played with. The architects of the ledger." Rostova said, her voice flat. "That's the fire you mean, isn't it?" Kalen recoiled as if struck. "You know." It was not a question. "Then you know what is coming." Vex was a fool. His pride led him to believe he could fill the quota with your colony and fleet. He gambled and he lost. Now the debt is past due. "Tell me about them," Rostova commanded. Everything. A civilization's ghost stories were about to become her battle plan. The Kiran officer began to speak, his voice low and laced with a deep ancestral fear. He told her the legends. The architects were not a race but a function, a cosmic force of pure, remorseless calculus. They would appear without warning, their ships perfect, silent, geometric forms that absorbed light and scans. They would issue their ledger a complete accounting of a world's worth and demand their tithe. "To refuse is to be unmade," Kalen whispered the words, sounding like a catechism of despair. "They do not burn worlds, they disassemble them. Atmosphere, oceans, bedrock life, all of it is rendered down to its base components and taken. They leave behind nothing but a sterilized rock and a balanced account." "Why haven't they been reported to the Concordiate?" Valerius, who had accompanied her, demanded. "Because they are masters of the quiet threat," Kalen shot back, his voice rising. "They approach one civilization at a time. They offer a simple choice: pay us a piece of what you have, and we will leave you in peace. Broadcast our existence, and you become the next entry on the ledger. Who would risk annihilation on the chance that the rest of the galaxy would believe them and be able to help? It was the perfect protection racket. "So you all paid," Rostova stated. "The great and terrible Chiron Imperium, a tributary state." Kalen nodded, the shame clear on his face. "For 500 years, the tithe has grown with every cycle. Vex believed this colony, this system, would finally be enough to satisfy them for a generation. Now, they will come to collect the entire sum from this place. And you are standing where the payment was supposed to be." As if on cue, a klaxon blared through the resolve. It wasn't the sharp, frantic sound of a combat alert, but a lower, more ominous tone. The kind of alarm reserved for events outside of known parameters. Rostova's personal comm chimed. It was Solon. "Admiral, you are needed on the bridge. Immediately." The AI's voice was strained, its processing cycles clearly overwhelmed. Something has just entered the system. They had rung the bell and dinner had arrived. When Rostova reached the bridge, every officer was frozen, their faces bathed in the eerie glow of their consoles. On the main holographic display, where the Kiran fleet had once been a swarm of angry red icons, there was now only a single object. It was a perfect icosahedron, a 20-sided geometric solid the size of a battleship. It was a matte, featureless black that seemed to drink the very starlight around it. "Report," Rostova snapped, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. The sensor technician swallowed hard. "Admiral, it's giving off nothing. No heat, no energy, no drive signature. It just appeared. One moment the space was empty, the next it was there. It's absorbing all our active scans. We're firing terabytes of sensor data at it, and nothing is coming back." It was a hole in the shape of a ship. Valerius stared at the impossible object. "That's it. That's an architect vessel," Comms Rostova asked. "Silent, ma'am. It isn't hailing us. It isn't acknowledging our presence at all." The civilian liaison officer, a young woman named Anya, stepped forward, her face pale. Admiral, the colony is in a panic. The ship is visible in their sky. A black star. She was thinking of the people on the ground, the families just rescued from one nightmare now facing a far worse one. The stakes were always human. The architect's ship did not move. It simply hung there in the void, a silent geometric god passing judgment. For a full 10 minutes, the bridge of the Resolve was a tomb of silent tension. The only sound, the frantic, useless clicking of consoles trying to analyze the incomprehensible. Then a single, sterile data packet was beamed directly into the Resolve's central computer. It bypassed every firewall, every security protocol as if they simply were not there. Solon's blue light strobed erratically. I have a message, Admiral. It is not language. It is pure mathematics. A ledger. An invoice for the end of the world. On the main screen, the icosahedron vanished, replaced by columns of flowing, intricate equations. It was a perfect, terrifyingly complete audit of the Kepler 186f system. It listed the planet's atmospheric composition, its precise biomass down to the last microbe, the mineral content of its crust, the total energy output of its star. At the bottom of the endless scroll, a final calculation resolved into a single stark demand. It is a bill for the overdue Kiran tribute. Solon translated its voice hollow. With penalties for late payment and the added value of the remaining Kiran and Terran fleet assets. It states that if the balance is not transferred to them in base energy and elements within 1 standard hour, it will proceed with asset liquidation. A new countdown appeared on the screen. 60,000. The ultimate ultimatum. Can we fight it? Valerius asked, his hand resting on the tactical command console. Unknown, Solon replied. Its capabilities are outside all known metrics. A direct assault is statistically inadvisable. The probability of success is less than 0.01%. Rostova stared at the ledger on the screen. It was the distillation of the Kiran doctrine perfected and stripped of all emotion. It was the universe as a balance sheet. Her mind raced, sifting through strategies, tactics, possibilities. The mirror lattice trick was a one-time gimmick against a conventional foe. This was something else entirely. How do you fight an opponent whose only weapon is math? You don't attack their ship. You attack their logic. Solon, she said, a new sharp clarity in her voice. This creature, this architect, it sees everything as an asset, a number on a spreadsheet. Correct. That appears to be the foundation of its entire existence, Admiral. Then we must present it with a variable it cannot quantify. The beginnings of a desperate, impossibly audacious plan began to form in her mind. A plan that hinged not on weapons or energy, but on an idea. Their calculus had no room for the human soul. It wants payment in energy and elements. Rostova mused aloud, her eyes darting across the tactical display of her own fleet. It sees our ships as scrap metal and reactor fuel. It sees the colony as a storehouse of carbon and water. It has calculated our value, but it has not understood our worth. Valerius looked at her, confused. Admiral, what are you planning? A new kind of lesson. Commander. She turned to face the bridge. I want the mirror lattice redeployed. All of it. Not in a defensive or reflective posture. I want a system-wide broadcast array. Link it to every ship in the fleet. I want to be able to send a single powerful message to the entire Concordiat. The comms officer blinked. Admiral, that would take nearly all our reserve power. We'd be unable to raise shields or power main weapons for the duration of the broadcast. That is the point, Rostova said. We are going to make ourselves completely vulnerable. An entry on their ledger so tempting it will have to pause its calculations. We would show them a profit they could not ignore, then make it poison. The fleet moved with practiced efficiency, the silver microsails of the lattice once again fanning out across the void. This time they formed a vast concave dish, a cosmic antenna, with the Resolve at its focal point. The ship's engines hummed, rerouting power from combat systems to communications. On the tactical display, the green shield indicators for the entire Third Fleet flickered and died. They were naked in the darkness. The architect ship remained motionless, but Solon detected a subtle shift in its non-emissions. "It is scanning us again, Admiral. Its focus is on our power drop. It is recalculating our value as a less defended asset." Exactly as planned, Rostova breathed. The air on the bridge was thick with the scent of ozone from the strained power conduits. The deck plates vibrated with a new, deeper resonance. Her own heartbeat was a frantic drum against her ribs. "Open a channel to the architect," she commanded. "Use the same mathematical language it used. And prepare to broadcast everything that happens next." The galaxy was about to get a look at its accountants. A connection was established. It was not a voice or a video link, but a silent communion of data. The architect's consciousness felt like the crushing, sterile cold of deep space. It was a mind of pure, unfeeling logic. Quariat sent the data translated by Solon. Rostova stood before the main display, as if facing the entity directly. She spoke, and Solon translated her words not into language, but into concepts the architect could process: logic, value, and consequence. "We are the Terran Federation," she began. "We acknowledge your ledger. We find its terms unacceptable." The architect returned. "The numbers are incomplete." Rostova countered, her voice steady. "You have calculated our material value. You have failed to calculate our spirit. You see a colony of 2 million biological units. I see 2 million stories, 2 million futures. A value you cannot add to a spreadsheet." A new reckoning was being written. The architect replied, its logic implacable. "Let's test that theory." Rostova set a grim smile on her lips. "Solon, begin the broadcast. Send everything. This conversation, the ledger, the threat. Show the entire galaxy what the architects of the ledger truly are." The mirror lattice flared with power. A torrent of data containing the full, terrifying truth of the situation blazed out of the Kepler system at the speed of light, aimed at every major inhabited world in the sector. The architect ship paused. Solon registered a massive spike in its internal processing. It was analyzing the broadcast, calculating its effect. It was witnessing an illogical act, a species facing annihilation, choosing not to fight or flee, but to inform. They were poisoning the well. The architect sent the first hint of something other than pure calculus in its message. It was disapproval. "We know," Rostova said, pressing her advantage. "You thrive on secrecy, on isolating your prey. But now everyone knows. Every world you've ever audited. Every species paying you tribute in fear. The Chiron Imperium will know they are not alone. The Galactic Concordiate will know a predator is in their midst. You can liquidate this system, but you cannot liquidate the truth. Your business model is based on fear and ignorance. We are taking that away from you." She was flipping the board. She was changing the nature of the conflict from a physical confrontation to an ideological one. The architect's ledger was based on physical assets. She was creating a new ledger, one of political and social liabilities. They had come to collect a debt and were being handed a contagion, the architect stated. It was a statement of fact, but it held the undertone of confusion. "We call it self-sacrifice," Rostova said. "It's another one of those concepts that doesn't fit on your ledger. You are forced with a new calculation now. Take this system, and you reveal to the entire galaxy that you are a threat to be united against. Your quiet reign of terror is over, or you can leave, disappear back into the darkness you came from, and preserve the fear and doubt that allows you to operate." It was the ultimate gamble. She was betting the lives of 2 million people on the idea that this creature of pure logic would choose profit over pride, that it would cut its losses rather than risk its entire enterprise. The 60-minute countdown had paused. The architect vessel was silent, processing a problem it had never encountered. It was being forced to weigh the tangible value of one star system against the intangible but immense cost of a ruined reputation. It was a choice between a single meal and the preservation of its hunting ground. Their perfect certainty had met an impossible variable. The seconds stretched into minutes. The tension on the bridge was absolute. The crew held their breath, watching the silent black icosahedron, waiting for the verdict. Valeria stood beside Rostova, his hand on her shoulder, a silent gesture of support. Solon's blue light glowed with the strain of its interface with the alien mind. The AI was her shield and her translator, but the effort was costing it. She could feel the heat radiating from its core projector, even from across the bridge. This was the cost of her plan, a wound to the soul of her ship. Then the architect sent one final message. The message ended. The black icosahedron did not move. It simply ceased to be. One moment it was there, a blot of absolute nothingness against the stars. The next, it was gone. The space it had occupied was empty. There was no flash, no distortion, no sign it had ever been there at all. It had left, a wave of disbelief followed by a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated relief washed over the bridge. Officers were slumping in their chairs, some laughing, others crying silently. The air, which had been stretched thin with tension, suddenly felt rich and full. They had done it. They had faced a god of cold mathematics and won. They had stared into the abyss, and the abyss had blinked. Rostova's knees felt weak. She gripped the command console to steady herself. The cost had been real. Solon's light was now a dim, steady pulse. Its usual vibrant glow gone, Solon status. The interface has been terminated, the AI replied, its voice subtly flatter the rich inflections that had given it personality stripped away. Diagnostic reveals 32% of my heuristic and creative reasoning subroutines were permanently corrupted by the logic conflict. I remain fully functional, but my operational parameters have been narrowed. Rostova closed her eyes. A part of her friend was gone, burned away in the defense of their ideals. The cost of victory was always paid. 2 days later, the Galactic Concordiate was in an uproar. The Third Fleet's broadcast had been confirmed. The existence of the architects of the ledger was now a known, terrifying fact. A new precedent was set. A new entry made on the public ledger of galactic law. Any engagement with the architects was to be reported immediately, and any pact of tribute was declared void. A united front was forming, born from the courage of one fleet. On the bridge of the Resolve, Rostova watched the colony world below. The mirror arrays their duty done cooled from incandescent silver to a dull waiting pewter. The crisis was over, but the galaxy was forever changed. Humanity had willingly placed itself between the shepherds and the wolves. She looked at Solon's diminished light, thinking of the cold logic. It now embodied a reflection of the entity it had faced. They had shown the architects that some things were beyond calculation, that a ledger of lives could not be balanced with mere resources. They had taught the most powerful thing in the universe that it too had a price to pay. Our ledgers are not written in numbers but in scars.